Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 1989's Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse, the infamously hard-as-nails return to form for Konami's vampire-slaying adventure, now featuring multiple playable characters.
Following that is a tale of revenge for the death of your older sister, all while the decisions you make literally shape your appearance and your world, all with your canine best friend by your side. 2008's Fable II. Those sure are some Roman numerals in these sequel titles. That's honestly the best thread we could weave between these two games.
Is there magic in Fable 2?
I mean, yeah, but that's also a pretty loose connection.
I mean, yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, hey, if it works, it works.
You know, it sure does. Although it was interesting to see in pre-production video footage, like video documentaries for Fable 2, the logo before it got finalized had an Arabic number 2 in the title, which like that was interesting to see after just knowing the Roman numeral 2 in that logo for years.
I wonder why that got changed. I wonder if it's anything like why the Witcher's logo got changed.
Oh, maybe. That's a good point. I wonder. Hadn't thought of it. Anyway, thank you, Joe, for covering on the solo episode last week. The way scheduling worked out, really needed that one to happen. And I'm sorry that you were feeling so sick. Oh my gosh. Hope you're feeling better.
No, but that's okay. I have been, people that follow me on Twitter or like watch the streams will know that I've been essentially ill in some form for the past 3 months. Don't worry, I'm seeing a doctor about it soon. It's fine. But yeah, no, it was perfectly fine. I enjoyed talking about that game a lot. I wish I had been able to find more information on it at the very least.
Well, hopefully you get good news on that soon. And it sounds like your voice is sounding better. Your energy's better on this one. So hope that all turns around for you soon. We're all thinking of you. Well, anyway, since it's been a little bit since we've talked, how are you doing and what are you playing?
So I finished Wind Waker for Smasterpieces. Again, third time in my life I've beaten the game. I still like that game despite its flaws. It's got a lot of flaws, but I like that game a lot. And then I played a game called Soundfall, which is a rhythm-based looter shooter. By the time this episode comes out, I should have my review out on that. And also, still trucking away on 13 Sentinels. I got 3 more characters at 100% since last time we talked.
Nice.
Maybe I'll finish it this week. I don't know. We'll see. But most importantly, I played a Kingdom Hearts 2 randomizer. Basically, it's a mod for the PC version of the game that takes all of the abilities, all of the things you get for level ups, all of the keyblades, everything, and just shuffles around where you get them. So, I didn't find Scan until I found it in a chest, like 8 hours in.
Oh,
and then found it again 2 hours later for some reason. I never found Second Chance. And basically the way it works is you got to get the 3 proofs, the crowns, to fight Xemnas, and that's how you finish the game. But for the most part, things could be anywhere. They could be in a chest. They could be behind a boss. They could be behind a level up, behind a drive form level up. Behind a world completion, they could be anywhere. I finished all of Timeless River and got 3 potions for doing so. It was quite an experience. I probably shouldn't do another one anytime soon because it was one of those dangerous things where I would start, be like, yeah, I'll put a couple hours in today, and then I would look at the clock and it would be midnight. So,
oops.
Yeah, I liked it, I will say.
Well, that's good. And I was thinking with Soundfall, that was a game that was covered in the recent Indie World presentation, right?
Correct. It was one of the shadow drops.
Yeah, there you go. So in case people are like, that title sounds familiar, I beat Horizon Forbidden West. That was a good time and put it about 42 hours into that. I did not expect it to end the way it did. It's, kind of setting up the future of the franchise in a way that was reminiscent of other franchises before it. I'll just say. So it's probably going to be pretty high on my favorite games of the year. I'm not going to say it's tough to beat as a number one, but I think it could be in a top 5 by year's end. And now what do I get to play next? I'm looking at some Game Pass games that are on my kind of watch list there. And Chinatown Detective Agency may be on that list. So could be getting to that soon.
For me, it's Norco is going to be my next game, pass game, hopefully. Maybe. We'll see.
Well, speaking of Horizon, let's talk about some composer follow-up news where we talk about plenty of composers on this show. We like to follow up what they're doing in the industry, talk about the games that we've covered on the show, how those are still going on. And with Horizon, a series in that PlayStation franchise is supposedly coming to Netflix. PlayStation talked about a whole bunch of PlayStation production sort of projects that are in the works with all of their different IP. And the Horizon series coming to Netflix was a new one. This kind of came in conjunction with the news that their efforts to get PlayStation Studio games on PC is going very well, specifically headlined by Horizon Zero Dawn selling 2.4 million copies on PC. So that's an effort that they're going to look to bolster in the coming years.
Come on, Sly Cooper on PC. I know that's not going to be their priority, and it never will be. But I can dream.
That'd be great.
It would be great to have it playable literally anywhere other than the PlayStation 3 nowadays. It's not on that list of games for the new PlayStation Plus tier starting out. Meanwhile, the 2022 Gang Awards have happened. That's the Game Audio Network Guild. And Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy wins Music of the Year, while Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart wins Audio of the Year. So congrats to both of those. I am so shocked at how diverse the best music winners of all the different award shows last year have been.
And it's been like all games that we had on honorable mentions at best last year. So it's like, did we miss something?
No, it's okay. We're the ones that were right. See, it's the professionals that are wrong.
No, but it's like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, Psychonauts 2, Returnal, and like, get it, we're great. Like, we mentioned them, but they weren't in our top 10. Like, none of those.
I don't know. I have no idea. But yeah, it's just been... And none of them have been Chicory. None of them have been the one we picked for number one.
I know.
It's... What a weird year.
As the year progresses, as we get closer into the Summer Games Fest mess, oh my gosh, we're almost at early June, which means, it's going to be the E3 replacement conferences. Oh boy, we're going to have a lot of game news here very soon. But different games are being announced literally just before we started recording. It's like, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is confirmed as the Fallen Order sequel.
And when he says just before recording, he means like 10 minutes ago.
So... yeah, that happened. But Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 we talked about before on the show. We haven't talked about Jedi Fallen Order. But the reimagining in the kind of modern style that they're trying to do with, a few years ago in 2019, they did the reimagining of the first Modern Warfare game. And now Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. It's different because it's got the Roman numerals too. See, that's why it's different. It's launching on October 28th this year, and this is before the supposed rumors that Call of Duty will not have an annual campaign release next year. So enjoy it while you can, I guess.
Sure. Speaking of the same company, 28 QA testers at Raven Software, which is a studio under Activision Blizzard, have voted to organize as Game Workers Alliance, starting the process to become one of the first major gaming unions in the United States. Let's go. It's happening time, baby.
Yeah!
Granted, there is still, I'm sure, plenty of underhanded tricks and stuff that Activision could try and stop this.
There's that whole merger thing.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that could happen, but I'm really, really pulling for this to move forward, and I'm really pulling for it to inspire other groups in the industry to be like, you know what, we should do that too, because they should.
I think it's a hopeful, promising step on that front. A few months ago at the beginning of February, we talked about the Pokemon Diamond Pearl Sound Library. And Pokemon DP Sound Library was a website that you go to and download the soundtrack to the original Diamond and Pearl games and stream it whenever you want. No, the website's shutting down soon. After a little more than 3 months. And maybe it's because no one really went to a specific website to go listen to a soundtrack. But, you know, whether it was Nintendo's decision, whether it was the Pokemon Company's decision, just get your music on Spotify and other streaming services. I know the Pokemon Company is okay with getting their soundtracks on Apple Music and all that, but come on. A one-off website is not going to cut it in 2022.
A one-off website for not even half a year. Why did you bother?
I mean, we applauded Nintendo at the time for, like, saying, yeah, okay, let's, whatever hand we have in it, but not like this. Don't cut it short just like that.
Yeah, it's dumb. I believe the Pokemon Company has a certain level of autonomy around where their music goes because they've released all of their stuff on iTunes or now Apple Music. So who knows? And lastly, Death's Diner is a short film that we have mentioned before because Lena Raine is the co-composer for it. It is showing online now at insideout.ca, which is a film festival. You need tickets to watch it, but it's playing through June 5th. For people that don't know, it's a short film that's based off of a series of tweets about death running a diner where the souls of the recently departed go for their last meal before moving on. And it's a really, really cool concept, and I'm very much looking forward to, at some point, getting to see this film myself, and the fact that Lena Raine's working on it is just icing on the cake.
Yeah, I remember us mentioning it on the show, so it's neat to see that finally come to fruition. And we will wrap things up with VGM Hurdle. That's our attempt at playing the Hurdle spin-off where video game music track is presented each and every day. And whether it's 1 second, 2 seconds, 4, 6, 8, 16, we try to guess the video game music track. It's been fun the last few weeks. And Joe, how you been doing with these recently?
It's still off and on. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is the most iconic first note you could have possibly had. And sometimes it's, I've never played this game and would never have known this song.
Sometimes it's the same measure over and over again for all 16 seconds. And you haven't played Minecraft before, but you still didn't get that it was a track from Minecraft. Anyway, you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
Let's hear this first second. Oh, yeah. Shoot. Oh, it's from Tetris. It's Tetris B.
Yep, sure is.
Yeah, let's type that in as type B. You know what? I only knew it because of Smash Brothers.
That's the only reason I would have known it too. Because of that like Central American remix.
Yeah.
Of it.
Oh, no.
That version is really good. But yeah, that's the only reason I knew it as well.
Yeah. So hey, that's fun. I know it was a little tougher to get that Death's Door one. So kudos to you for figuring that one out last week, though.
I'm sad that I got it wrong once, but hey, I got it in the end. And speaking of getting it wrong once, but getting it in the end, That's a perfect description of Castlevania. You see, we talked about the original Castlevania. We've also talked about Symphony of the Night, and I believe those are the only two Castlevanias we have talked about on this show. Because what other ones are we going to talk about?
Castlevania 2 only for bloody tears.
Pretty much. See, the original Castlevania came out and people really liked it. And then Castlevania 2 came out and people did not like it. At all. So, enter Castlevania III, Dracula's Curse, which was originally released for the Famicom on December 22nd, 1989 in Japan. North America would get it on the NES a year later, on September 1st, 1990, and then Europe would have to wait 2 more years before seeing it released on December 10th, 1992. It was developed and published by Konami, except in Europe where it was published by Palcom. As you might guess, it's the third game in the Castlevania series. And it goes back to being a regular platformer. See, one of the main reasons why people didn't like Castlevania 2 is that, yeah, it was a platformer, but it took a more RPG adventure-ish style of gameplay where you had to, go find things and kind of explore an open world. And it's bad. People don't like it. But Castlevania 3 goes back to more along the lines of the original Castlevania, which was just a platformer. Now, the two main differences between this and the original Castlevania are, one, Castlevania 3 is non-linear. There are 2 paths you can take in Castlevania 3. Also, there are multiple playable characters, each with their own abilities and attacks and stuff, 4 in total. One is the default, being Trevor Belmont, who is the Belmont. He plays like a Castlevania character. He has the Castlevania jump and he's got the whip. In the second level, you can get one of 3 travel companions, and you can only have one at a time. So, you can get Sifa Belnades, who is a sorceress able to use powerful magic spells, even though her physical attacks are super weak. You have Grant Dynasty, or Dynasty as it's spelled. He's a pirate who can change direction mid-jump, which I know that doesn't sound like much, but in Castlevania, that is overpowered. And he can also wall climb. And lastly, this is the game that introduced Alucard, the son of Dracula, who has the ability to shoot fireballs and turn into a bat. These characters can be switched between by pressing select. However, both characters share the same life bar as well as the same heart counter for the use of sub-weapons. There are different endings depending on who you are traveling with. So this is an NES game with multiple endings. Kinda ahead of its time in a lot of ways, honestly. So, the story of Castlevania III. In 1476, Count Dracula has begun to destroy all of Europe using his army of monsters, and the church is forced to call upon the Belmont family to help, despite exiling them long ago out of fear for their supernatural power. Either by himself or alongside a companion, Trevor Belmont begins his journey to slay Dracula and end his war on Europe in what is, I'm pretty sure, still the earliest game on the Castlevania timeline. So, the questions are fairly simple. Can Trevor and friends beat Dracula? That's the question. So this is where I will ask, Peter, what are your experiences with Castlevania 3?
I think I've seen some gameplay of it. Considering I have not even played the original Castlevania, there'd be no way I would just go on and tackle 3 by myself, especially when you mentioned it's pretty hard. It's a difficult game. So I know that. And then there's also a cool thing about the soundtrack that is also with this game. So I'll let you get to that one. But That's really all I know. I didn't know about the multiple playable characters. I didn't know about the multiple playable routes. I didn't know about the multiple endings. So I'm sure there is lots to learn here about Castlevania III.
I've also never played it because I'm pretty sure this is still considered the hardest game in the Castlevania franchise. It is infamously hard as nails. I'm good. But it's got a fantastic soundtrack. It might actually have one of my favorite Castlevania soundtracks in general.
Damn.
And Castlevania fans really, really like it. It's, I believe, also one of the most beloved Castlevania games in the series, or at least outside of the Igavania titles, at the very least.
Yeah, I think I've heard that too. Like it's a return to form and just even better than the original that they love.
Mm-hmm. So, when I looked up development history for Castlevania III, pretty much all I was able to find was differences between the Japanese and English versions. So, the first one, and most important one, is that in Japanese, Trevor's name is Ralph C. Belmondo.
Wow.
Which is awesome. Ralph. Is there any less threatening name than Ralph?
When it's also slang for vomit? No.
The least intimidating they could have given him. So, there are some other differences between the two versions, obviously. Grant throws his dagger in the Japanese version instead of in the Western version where he is stabbing with it. Some enemies in the Japanese version are weaker than the version we would originally get. And certain sprites were changed when we got it in the West to remove instances of mild nudity and religious iconography, which was a common thing for games released on the NES in the West. One of Nintendo of America's policies back then was no religious iconography at all. None.
That sounds about right, yeah.
If you'll remember, they wouldn't even let a cross be on the hospital in Earthbound. Like, it went that far. So, the other thing that I don't understand why the Western version has cheat codes and the Japanese version doesn't. There's a cheat code. The only one that Wikipedia specifically mentioned was if you type in help me, then you'll get 10 lives. But there were also ones to like basically launch a new game plus. And Japan just didn't get that, which is odd to me. And the other one, which is not really game development centric, but I found it kind of interesting. For the first time in the series, the Western and Japanese box arts were different. The Western art was painted by artist Tom Dubois and was inspired by the art of Ray Harryhausen, which, if people don't know, he's one of the fathers of stop motion, modern stop motion. And the game reviewed overall pretty well upon release. Famitsu gave it a 30 out of 40. Many critics praised it for its feeling of a return to form after Simon's Quest, but also stated that, as you said you've heard, it somehow manages to be even better than the original. And Koji Igarashi, who was at one point the head of the Castlevania franchise, actually cites Castlevania III as his favorite game in the series. And apparently the music and sound design is a big part of that. The Netflix animated series Castlevania is, at least the first and second season, largely an adaptation of Castlevania III. It follows Trevor and Sifa and Alucard, but Grant does not get to exist. He's not there. I think there's a character in season 4 that is named similarly to him, and that's considered to be shout out, but that's the closest he gets. But that show's really good, and I recommend it for anybody that hasn't watched it. It's very good.
He's just too dynasty.
He's too dynasty. When they asked him to turn down his dynasty, and he said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And they had to let him go. The Castlevania series obviously would continue into the future, but at this current time, would it be fair to call it over? I think it'd be fair to call it dead currently.
Yeah, probably.
Thanks, Konami.
I think the creators are working on the Devil May Cry one next, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds cool. I'd like the sound of that.
I may be totally wrong with that, though, but I think it's, what's his, Adi Shankar, I think his name is. I think that's
he's
tied in. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's working on that, and I believe there's also another Castlevania animated series in the works that's going to be Rondo of Blood and Symphony of the Night, specifically.
Oh, that'd be cool.
They're just going to skip Simon Belmont, because who cares? So, looking forward to that. Hopefully that something comes out of that. Castlevania III itself was released on all 3 renditions of Virtual Console. That's the Wii, 3DS, and the Wii U. But though currently the best place to find and play Castlevania III legally is on the Castlevania Anniversary Collection that is on everything. Buy it everywhere.
And you can usually get it pretty cheap when it goes on sale.
Yeah. So if you really want to play this and, other games too, except for the best Castlevania game, or the one that's considered the best Castlevania game, then you can play it there. So, for composers that we're going to talk about today, we're going to specifically talk about Hidenori Maezawa. So, Mr. Maezawa was born September 14th, 1958 in Osaka, Japan. He apparently became a fan of music specifically because his older brother really liked the Beatles. Which I think that's the first time that has come up for a Japanese composer, but that does not surprise me even slightly. But he didn't decide that he wanted to actually make his own music until he was about 20 years old. At that point, he joined a band, but then realized that he was not good at playing any instruments. So he decided to instead turn his attention to composition. And he began working at Konami as a composer in 1986, and he was immediately put onto the already in progress Castlevania, though he says he did not actually play a large role in the sound of that game. And apparently later on he became Konami's go-to guy for porting the music of their arcade games into a form that could work on the NES, which was described as a Herculean task because, there's a lot more sound channels on an arcade cabinet than there is on an NES or Famicom even sound chip. And that job was such a Herculean task that sometimes he was just allowed to compose new tracks for these games if he needed to. He left the gaming division of Konami in 1992 to become a director at the music label side of the company, but soon after that he left Konami entirely and he formed his own company called Picnic, which that sounds familiar, and I feel like we have mentioned this company before at some point. He still works at Picnic today, and he has a goal with the company to be a middleman between the gaming and music industries, which he sees as 2 industries that are incredibly different and kind of need that go-between. He also works as a freelance composer still for various media, from games to movies to, of course, pachinko machines. Because you can take the man out of the Konami, but you can't take the Konami out of the man. He even has a personal studio album called Rainbook, which was recorded alongside Japanese folk singer Yoko Yamamoto. Now, I'm kind of surprised at the games that I saw his name on. There were a lot of these where he was sound designer, and then a good chunk of them where he was the music person as well. A game called Life Force and Hinotori. He also worked on the original Contra, did the music for The Adventures of Bayou Billy, Top Gun: The Second Mission, Cosmic Wars, of course Castlevania III, Super Contra. He is credited as having done some music on Tatsunoko vs. Capcom Ultimate All-Stars.
So we may have mentioned him during that episode.
Maybe. Abobo's Big Adventure, which I believe was a Double Dragon spin-off made by someone. I don't remember. But most recently, he was one of the 3 composers on the sound team of Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, which is the ArcSys fighting game based on the mobile game, which apparently has a super good soundtrack from what I hear. Now, when talking about the music itself, you mentioned that there was some weirdness that happened with the sound chip involved in this soundtrack. So see, the Famicom and the NES had different sound chips. And in fact, I believe, if I remember the details 100%, like the Famicom could put sound chips in the cartridge and it would work just a little bit better. It had more sound channels to work with, so they could add more layers to the music. And the NES did not have that. So when the NES version was being developed to come out in the West, the composer Yoshinori Sasaki had to essentially redo the entire thing to work on the NES. Though on the official release of the soundtrack, if you hear music from Castlevania III anywhere, it's going to be from the Famicom version. That is considered the official version. The NES version, I guess, is out of sight, out of mind at this point. But yeah, it's really interesting and something that you'd think you'd hear about more from this era, but this is the first time I feel like we've talked about a game that specifically had this problem.
Yeah, and I think this is the one that it's really highlighted for. So for the big sound chip dorks out there, the sound chip in question for the Famicom is the VRC6. And the VRC6 is important because when you get people like Jake Kaufman who are trying to emulate an 8-bit style today for games like Shovel Knight, they are trying to replicate the VRC6, which is an expensive Konami sound chip, to allow for more possibilities, more levels, more effects, what have you. But it's with this game that it brought this up. And so, yeah, I don't think I've ever heard the NES version with its not as powerful one. But yeah, it's the VRC6. And that's what a lot of, 8-bit composers these days, when they're trying to replicate the glory days, like they're going for emulating this style on their sort of tracker software.
And so the aim for the soundtrack specifically, though, was they wanted to use these 8-bit sounds to really simulate the feeling that the music was being played by a string section, which, would explain why this music translates crazy well into being played by a string section. Who would have thought? So let's get into the 5 critical tracks. Now, I do want to warn real quick, I had meant to go look up what stages these played on, but I did not have a chance to do so, so I apologize for that. I know the names of some of them because they're obvious and also shared by some of the titles, but I don't know the exact numbers or anything, and I apologize for that. But let's start with critical track number 1. This is Beginning. So I feel like this is one of the songs where if you've heard music from this game, this is one of them. Because this is a very, very, the instant I heard this while listening through to figure out the Critical 5, I was like, oh yeah, I've heard this song before. And it's good. This is quintessential Castlevania. You could tell me this is from Castlevania 1 and I'd believe you. This is the tone. This is the type of music.
It almost makes me even feel like it's trying to borrow some themes from that original game, but I don't know, is it or is it not?
Who knows? I would assume it probably is at least trying to borrow a little bit, but the rest of the soundtrack kind of feels different from the original in a lot of ways. This is the only one that really hits me of oh yeah, this is essentially a Castlevania 1 song. It's interesting, I think.
Yeah, and so when I hear it, I start humming along too. So like, it makes me wonder, like, God, is it borrowing like some of those classic themes, or at least trying to emulate it? But still, it does strike a tone with you as like a classic video game music piece. And this definitely had to be here.
And it also kind of fits being the only one that feels like a classic Castlevania track, because this plays in level 1, and that's the only level where you are required to always be Trevor by himself.
Interesting, yeah.
Because after this, you can go get one of your companions. So that, it's an interesting way to think about it, I think. Following that, we have critical track number 2. This is Mad Forest. This is a song I had not heard before, and it's great. I think this is the first time you can really see this music like evolving past what the original did. And also, you know what this kind of reminds me of? This song kind of reminds me of some of the stuff I'd later hear in Shovel Knight.
Yep.
A little bit. But it's got this really neat sort of forward-moving momentum to it. I really like the intro. It's not in the clip, but like, it feels like a Mega Man song at the start. But overall, I think it really comes into its own, and this song is just really fun to listen to, honestly.
Super Smash Bros. Ultimate got 3 songs in its Castlevania music collection. One of them was a new remix of Beginning, and another one was the Castlevania Judgment rendition of Mad Forest. So, yeah, a classic Castlevania melody. It feels like it's very similar, I think, to like the original sort of Castlevania as far as its melodies go, but it's just kind of, it's lifted up a little bit with the possibilities of the sound chip, and I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Find that as critical track number 3. This is Rising. This is a bit of a change in tone compared to the last 2 songs. This one's a bit more slow. Well, maybe not slow, but like a little more low-key, kind of spooky. Because remember, these are horror action games. You are on your way to fight a vampire and fighting a bunch of monsters on your way there. And I think this kind of fits. It also at certain points feels like a Kirby song.
Yeah.
I just don't know how else to put it. Like, the part at the very end of the clip sounds Kirby-ish. But for the most part, yeah, I think this really brings across, like, the spooky side of Castlevania III. And I like it.
In the back half of the clip, it's incredible to hear the attempted reverb effects. The blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Like, the little echoing there. That's the possibility of that VRC6 chip. And, wow, that would not have been possible any earlier. I think it just goes to show, like, you know, we're working with better technology, but we're also working more with kind of the limitations of the technology and like trying to push those boundaries a little bit. And I think that's super cool. Like, that jumped way out when I heard that the first time on this track.
This is another one of those examples of, you know, when people have been working on a console for a long enough time, they figure out how to pull all the juice out of that console. And sound back in these days is no different. Now, you mentioned there were 3 Castlevania 3 songs in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the first one being Beginning, the second one being Mad Forest. Well, the third one, and my personal favorite song in the game, is critical track number 4, Aquarius. Now, this one almost feels Bloody Tears-ish.
It sure does.
But I like this song way more than Bloody Tears. Bloody Tears is really good. This song is fantastic. And is another song that has come back in a couple of Castlevania games since. It's in one of the GBA games that I played too much of recently. I don't remember exactly which one, but it's in one of them. And I don't know, this is another one of those songs that's like, it feels very Castlevania, but it also, like, you worded it as lifts it up. This is Bloody Tears, but what if Bloody Tears was somehow cooler? Mm-hmm. And I really, really, really like this song. Aquarius is such a good song.
I'm glad you mentioned the Bloody Tears comparison, because that's definitely what I thought. And as a fellow Aquarius, I gotta respect this song for its title.
I think this is like a water level, I would assume. Like a ship level. Probably a ship graveyard or something, I don't know.
That would make sense, yeah.
But yeah, and the Smash remix is so good. It actually might be my favorite of the Castlevania remixes. It's just really, really good. Aquarius is the reason I wanted to talk about Castlevania 3. This song is the reason I wanted to talk about this soundtrack in general. It's just really good. And lastly, critical track number 5. This one is the biggest surprise to me. It's Big Battle. Now, I believe this is a boss fight theme, and the reason that surprises me so much is because in Castlevania 1 and 2, the boss fight themes aren't very good. Yeah, I said it, Monster Dance isn't that good. And the Castlevania 1 boss theme is terrible. It's just the same repeating notes in like a 3-second loop. But this song is really, really good. It fits a higher energy fight. This feels a lot more like what boss fight themes in future Castlevanias would become. It has this really cool feeling of... This one I don't get like a string section vibe from. I get an organ vibe from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, just the fact that there is a classical NES Castlevania game with a good boss fight theme, that's enough to earn it notoriety in general.
These 16th notes here, just keep up the pace and don't stop. And yeah, wow. I mean, when it comes to this era, you don't have to do much, I think, to have a good boss battle track. But then you have something like this and it just stands out as like, top level.
Mm-hmm. It's really good. I'm glad they figured it out eventually. I'm probably going to have at least 1 or 2 people mad at me about Monster Dance, but I don't care. I said what I said. For tracks on the cutting room floor, Peter, you got a couple. Hit me.
Sometimes you like to help each other out, and when you had just like 2 more just kind of dangling there as like, I didn't know where to put it. I'll help you out. I have no experience with this soundtrack. I don't know where they go, but sure, buddy, let's put these here. My 2 tracks on the cutting room floor. The first one here is Clockwork. As people in the YouTube comments note, man, it's so interesting how Johann Sebastian Bach was, brought in to compose Castlevania music. And, obviously that's not true, but his influences I feel like they're all over this one with a kind of like a harpsichord feel, and it's dugga, 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 kind of going all over the place. Also, especially at the end, it kind of has like a consistent rhythm, almost like a ticking to it. So again, I don't know where this takes place. I think I've seen like rotating gears as part of the stage in Castlevania 3. So maybe it's a level with a lot of those. But yeah, Clockwork, not like the Sly Cooper villain, but I feel like it's fitting, probably not only in how it's represented in the stage, but also the very rhythmic sort of meter here in the music.
There is one constant in just about every Castlevania game, and that is there is pretty much always a clock tower with a bunch of gears that you have to climb, and that clock tower is the worst.
And that clock tower doesn't have the Scissor Man.
It doesn't have the Scissor Man, so is it even worth it? It usually has harpies, and those harpies can go straight to hell. Medusa heads usually too, but those are always everywhere, and they can also go straight to hell.
The other track I have on the cutting room floor is called Stream.
Good thing Trevor got that Twitch channel figured out. Like, I was worried about him.
Yeah, he's just got to now work on his subscriber count and try it. If he gets some dynasty on there, I don't know, that may be a little bit of a dangerous play there.
That might get his channel shut down. You better be careful about that, Trevor.
You don't want to risk a ban there. No, this one's fun. I don't have too much to say about it, but I wanted to help you out and throw it on my list.
It's good. There is, like you mentioned, these were two tracks that were just like, they almost made it on. They almost did, but at the end, they didn't quite make it, so I'm glad we were able to bring it up here. I also have two tracks on the cutting room floor. Both of them, I think, are the same sort of thing, but the first one, for sure, is another example like Critical Track number 5, and is here for roughly the same reason. This is Boss Fight. Now, granted, this sounds a lot closer to the previous two games, but it's still better? I don't know what this reminds me of, because, like, it's Shovel Knight again, obviously, because you mentioned Jake Kaufman tries to emulate this specific style. I don't know. This is just sort of a neat song, and again, I'm glad there's at least a passable boss battle theme in Castlevania, finally.
Shouts out to the bending of the pitches. I mean, that's, again, not easy to do, but you hear it here, and it's really great to see. Or hear, I guess, rather.
It could be either. And for my second track on the cutting room floor, this is Deadbeat. Lurking Now, this is a weird song. Like a really weird song. I think one of the YouTube comments actually sums it up the best, which is the beginning of this track is the game laughing at you for choosing the longer, more difficult route. But also the whole song just kind of feels like it's got like this mocking tone to it in a lot of ways. I don't know if you have the same like feeling when you hear it, but it feels like it is actively making fun of you.
I get that, but also I think the big thing is that it doesn't have a percussion track.
Yeah, it doesn't. And that's weird for a Castlevania song. Because if you've listened to all the other tracks, they usually have pretty fast-paced percussion parts. But this one just doesn't have anything. And I don't know, this song feels like the depths of madness, and I really, really like it. And this was probably the closest to being on the Critical 5 of all 4 of these, honestly. So what will I ever forget about Castlevania III? I don't have anything I can forget. I like the music a lot. Aquarius is really, really good, and I'm glad that I made myself listen to a bunch of the other songs, most of which I had never heard before. That's really all. I like the show. You should watch the show if you haven't watched the show. It's pretty good. Alucard's pretty cool, and there's a part where Trevor punches Dracula in the face, and it does nothing, and he responds with, "Ah, you must be the Belmont," which is my favorite joke in the entire damn show. It's a really good show, and I'm glad this game brought that to us, but God, I cannot wait to see Richter in animated form.
That'll be so cool. This turned me on to Aquarius. That's a really, really neat track, and also still just in love with the reverb in Rising. It's just fantastic, and loves hearing the VRC6 put to work.
It's just such a good soundtrack. Probably one of the better NES soundtracks out there, which is saying something, because there are so many good NES soundtracks. So, for our transition, we like to highlight a fan cover, fan remix, what have you, anything in that category. Of course, I had to go find a remix of Aquarius. That was my only option. That's the reason I wanted to do this game in the first place. That's the game and the song that I need to go look into. I found a remix of Aquarius called Lost in the Sea on the YouTube channel Hooded Edge. It kind of sounds like the version you would have heard if this game had come out on, like, the PC Engine, like Rondo of Blood. Feels very similar to that, so please enjoy that, and hey, we'll be right back.
Alright, we go from Castlevania 1, 2, 3 with those Roman numerals to Fable 1, 2. Again, just these vertical eyes defining the titles of these games. It is our first time talking about Fable. In fact, that would mean it's probably the first time we've also talked about the man behind Fable, and that would be one Peter Molyneux, who is known for being the creator of games like Populous, which is known as like the first God game, also Dungeon Keeper, and Black and White. He's also known for aggressively promoting his games and then not much comes of it, or at least certainly not what he hyped up. I mean, do we remember Project Milo for Kinect?
I try not to.
Well, some of us at least remember those claims. And Peter Molyneux and Lionhead Studios are most famous for Fable. And Fable released in 2004 for the original Xbox. Apparently, the pitch for Fable was, they wanted to make an RPG like none had ever seen before. So a quote here said, quote, "The world would be a breathtakingly beautiful place filled with waterfalls, mountains, dense forests, populated with compelling and convincing characters with real personality, people who actually reacted to what you did. We wanted to give the player control of a hero who would adapt to the way they played, who would age, become scarred in battle, who would get tattoos, wear dreadlocks, and a dress if the player was so inclined. We wanted each and every person who played our game to have a unique experience, to have their own stories to tell. And we called it Thingy. What a perfect encapsulation of British humor there on the end. Apparently, Fable was a franchise that had a couple different working titles, from Wish World to Project Ego. But then Fable came out, and it sold well, so it was time to have a sequel. And Fable II released on October 21st, 2008 in North America on Xbox 360. Australia would get the game a couple days later on October 23rd, Europe on October 24th. Then Fable 2 Game of the Year released in September 2009, also on Xbox 360, with all of the DLC that had released for the game. Then Fable Trilogy, which was a compilation for Xbox 360 that included Fable Anniversary, which was a remake of the first game, Fable 2, and Fable 3, that was released in February 2014. Now, Fable 2 was added to the Backwards Compatibility Collection on Xbox One in November 2015, and the entire Fable Trilogy is currently on Xbox Game Pass, so that is probably the place you could easiest play Fable today. Although if you did find your hands on a cheap used Xbox 360 copy, super cheap, you can't really go wrong there. The game is developed by Lionhead Studios and published by Microsoft Game Studios. Fable 2 is a third-person, open-world, action role-playing game. The main idea is that it's a story throughout the protagonist's life, starting at a young age. But the character's appearance and the world around them changes with the decisions that are made. The players can engage in several side quests, act in combat with weapons or magic, work repeatable jobs to earn money and rewards, build up a property empire, and customize their character's look. New features to this sequel in particular include the opportunity to choose between a male or female playable character, a fast travel system, and there's a canine companion who can detect treasures and alert the player to nearby enemies. The dog character has specific advanced AI, you don't control him, and he's your best friend. There's also online and offline co-op as an option, so if you go on Game Pass and you look for co-op games, the Fable games can show up there. The story of Fable 2. It's in the land of Albion, 500 years after the events of the original Fable game. The hero starts life as a poor orphan in Bowerstone, and is referred to as Sparrow by their older sister, Rose. After the two siblings acquire enough gold pieces to buy a music box that is said to grant any wish, their desire to live in a castle seems to come true, as they are invited to the nearby Fairfax Castle by its lord, Lucian. Lucian is curious about how the magic box magically worked in Sparrow and Rose's possession, and with a test in his study, he discovers that one of the two siblings is a hero of legend. They're not one of the three heroes that he's looking for, but instead, the fourth. So Lucian kills Rose in front of Sparrow and attempts to murder Sparrow as well, as they somehow stand in the way of him accomplishing what he wants. But fate intervenes, and the hero Sparrow survives the fall out of the castle window. After 10 years of growing up in secrecy, with the help of an old woman named Teresa, and the dog that was rescued from earning the original gold pieces, Sparrow must make a path for themselves in Albion. So the big questions: who are the other heroes? What kind of hero will you become? And can you get your revenge on Lucian for killing your sister? So Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Fable 2?
Nothing. I know the name Fable 2, and I know that it is a Peter Molyneux game, And that is literally all I know. I don't even think I've seen gameplay footage of Fable 2 in my life. Just nothing. I knew nothing.
I knew very little as well. And I feel like I only picked this game because of its composer connection. So obviously Fable 2, a game I had heard of. It's, a pretty famous box art with kind of a red background with the hero kind of kneeling down with like a reflection sort of below him. But yeah, I'd never really seen Fable gameplay, and looking back on it, it's like, 2008 sure was a time, especially when we're trying to figure out open world game design around this time, this generation for consoles. It's the same year that Fallout 3 came out. So like it was kind of competing against that for awards for, best RPG and all that. But at least Fallout 3 had kind of like the basics of a first person shooter behind it, at least as a main way of playing that game with many options. But Fable 2 is, kind of goofily running around an open world, and not even like that big of one from what I could tell. So it was a different time, certainly for open world games. But I think there are some interesting things about this game overall and with its soundtrack. And I tried to find out what I could, but there wasn't much out there. A lot of the wiki and main sources that we do for our research, sometimes they'll have development information, but this one was more about like the mechanics and systems at work. It's like, did you know that you can romance a character and same-sex options are available in Fable 2? And it's like, that's neat. What are the thoughts behind, the challenges they had with developing this game? Lionhead Studios, for what it's worth, they put out several video diaries, but I think those could only tell so much. Honestly, they spent part of one of them having a football match, a soccer match with Rare, because that's, their fellow, UK-based Microsoft Studios game, studio rival, I guess, at the time. So they're like, we had a footy match with Rare. And we won. Okay. Glad this is in your dev diary. But from what I could tell with Fable, the three games overall seem to explore different ages throughout history, in that the original is more about like medieval times. There's more of a colonial age of enlightenment sort of feel in Fable 2. And then you get into the industrial age in Fable 3. One of the biggest challenges with Fable 2 was simplifying the combat, as Lionhead wanted to invoke a one-button combat system and really have context-sensitive actions drive that. Not necessarily, as they said, they weren't trying to have like a realistic combat game, but one that felt good to play, like felt kind of authentic in that regard. So they weren't trying to go for, parry, slash this way, but context-sensitive actions with, pressing one button, because all melee combat takes place off the X button. All ranged combat uses the Y button, and magic or will abilities go to the B button. This game is also known for having several prominent actors play major characters in the game. Zoe Wanamaker plays Teresa, and I'm like, who's that? And I watch footage and hear Teresa's voice, and it's like, oh, she's Madam Hooch from Harry Potter. Oh. Okay, and I'm sure there are going to be British listeners like, Zoe Wanamaker has done a whole lot more than that, but to American audiences, she's Madam Hooch. Similarly, Ron Glass is an American actor. Like, who's Ron Glass? Oh, he's the preacher in Firefly / Serenity. Okay, yeah, I know him. And then Stephen Fry, the famous British comedian, former partner of Hugh Laurie. Stephen Fry also, there's a Harry Potter connection. He's also the audiobook reader for the main Harry Potter audiobooks. So Stephen Fry is also in this game as Reaver. That was about all I could find with the development history of Fable 2. So the game reviewed very well with a Metacritic average of 89. The open world design, the writing, the quest design, the dog character, the graphics, and the music were praised. But the story's depth, the kind of simplicity of the morality system, and some weird tech issues like incompatibility with standard definition screens, those were criticized. Yeah, that was definitely a thing at the time. We talked about that with Dead Rising, how that was just a weird thing on Xbox 360. Mass Effect, I think, also had similar issues. So that was just a thing as we were starting to transition to at least 720p HD screens. The game sold 3.5 million copies as of March 2010, making Fable II the 18th best-selling game on Xbox 360. That's pretty notable when you compare like all of the Call of Duty games, Grand Theft Auto games, all that on there. That's pretty good. It was nominated for 5 BAFTAs, including Best Game and Original Score, but it won Best Action Adventure Game. It was nominated for 6 Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Awards. We now know this as the DICE Awards, including Role-Playing Game of the Year and Outstanding Achievement in Original Music Composition, but it didn't win any of those 6 awards. And it was also nominated for Best Xbox 360 Game and Best Graphics at the Spike Video Game Awards. It did win Best Game of 2008, though, from outlets like XPlay and Joystick. In fact, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, or PETA, praised Fable II for its animal-friendly nature, giving it the Proggy Award for the most animal-friendly game of 2008, saying they enjoyed the game's pro-vegetarianism, giving the player purity points for eating non-meat products and corruption points for eating meat. However, there are also achievements encouraging players to hurt particular animals.
Oh, PETA. Every time you come up in any story relating to the video game industry, it's weird. That's weird.
That's why it had to be brought up, because, yeah, definitely strange. What's the legacy of Fable? Well, Fable 3, a sequel, released for Xbox 360 in 2010, and it involves the conflicts of the children of Fable 2's hero. So, yeah, you don't have to wait another 500 years, it's more like 50. After that, the franchise went into a bit of a tumble. So there was Fable Heroes, which was a multiplayer beat-em-up hack-and-slash game. Kind of think like a weirder-looking Castle Crashers that released in 2012 for Xbox 360 to poor reviews, like we're talking a Metacritic of 55. A few months later, Fable The Journey also released in 2012 for Xbox 360. This was an on-rails action-adventure game that was made for Kinect, and it also reviewed poorly. It was Peter Molyneux's last game at Lionhead as well. And remember Fable Legends? It was a game that was announced in August 2013 as a multiplayer game for the upcoming Xbox One console, where you could play as one of 4 heroes or the villain. And it was that game concept that, Evolve or Dead by Daylight would kind of take and run with. But despite the fact that it showed up at a couple E3 press conferences, it was ultimately canceled alongside the closure of Lionhead Studios in 2016.
I remember people talking about it. I've heard it talked about a few times, but I have zero memory of its announcement.
Yeah. I feel like I remember a demo or two at E3, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is a thing, but is it what Fable fans want?
I think I remember Fable The Journey being talked about as well, too, because I've heard recently on another podcast, I heard somebody talk about how they claimed over and over again it was not a rail shooter, and then it was a rail shooter.
Yeah.
So that's again, like the only experience I have with any of the Fable games is just hearing other people talk about them. That's it.
That's that Molyneux sell job for you. I feel like I also remember Fable Legends for being selling that second screen experience. Use an app on your tablet to maybe you can be the dungeon master, the villain, control that way. Ha 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 ha. Anyway, it's kind of relevant that Fable is sort of back in the game industry because a new Fable RPG was announced to be in development for the Xbox Series consoles in July 2020, with Forza Studio Playground Games as the developer, though we haven't heard anything since, and it was just a CGI trailer with Stephen Fry's voice and that old British humor with the fairy, and that was really it. People keep expecting it to be called Fable 4, but it was just Fable from what I recall. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, maybe I'll see gameplay of this one.
Maybe eventually. I don't know. So when you get the opportunity to talk about Danny Elfman in a context of a video game soundtrack, composer, music show, you're going to talk about Danny Elfman. We'll get to why that's a little more complicated later on, but Danny Elfman was born on May 29th, 1953 in Los Angeles, California. In his early school days, Elfman exhibited an aptitude for science with almost no interest in music. And he was even rejected from elementary school orchestra, quote, for having no propensity for music. However, this would change when he switched high schools in the late 1960s and fell in with a musical crowd who introduced him to early jazz and the work of Stravinsky and his 20th century contemporaries. After he finished high school early with plans to travel the world, Elfman followed his brother Richard to France, where he performed violin with Jérôme Savary's Le Grand Magic Circus, an avant-garde musical theater group. He then embarked on a 10-month self-guided tour through Africa, busking and collecting a range of West African percussion instruments, until a series of illnesses forced him to return home. It was at this point, in the early 1970s, that Elfman was asked by his brother Richard to serve as musical director of his street theater performance art troupe, the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. What they would do, basically, they'd take 1920s and 30s big band jazz music and rearrange it with up to 15 performers and 30 different musical instruments. Elfman had taken over the Mystic Knights as lead singer and songwriter in 1979, paring the group down to 8 players, shortening the name to Oingo Boingo, and recording and touring as a ska-influenced new wave band throughout the 80s. They're known for the song Weird Science, which was used as the theme for the 1985 film.
I don't think you will know the answer to this question, but this is the question for the rest of Twitter, I guess. This is the first time we've mentioned an artist connected to somebody that provided a name for a character in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure? Because there's 2 characters in JoJo named Oingo and Boingo.
Oh, interesting.
All the characters in JoJo are named after bands that the artist really likes or songs. It's why dubbing JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a trademark nightmare for everybody who tries to do it. But yeah, there are 2 characters named Oingo and Boingo, and I think this might be the first time we have talked about the origin point of a JoJo name.
Well, that's interesting. So, as fans of Oingo Boingo, Tim Burton and Paul Rubens invited Elfman to write the score for their first feature film, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, in 1985. Now, Elfman was initially apprehensive because of his lack of formal training and having never scored a studio feature, but after Burton accepted his initial demo of the title music, the rest, as they say, was history. See, Danny Elfman is predominantly known for scoring films by Tim Burton and Sam Raimi. He considers Bernard Herrmann, the main composer for a lot of Alfred Hitchcock films, to be his biggest composing influence. He is also inspired by 20th century classical composers like Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Bartók, and Shostakovich, as well as jazz, experimental, and minimalist composers like Duke Ellington and Philip Glass. So Elfman says that once a rough cut of a film is ready, he and the director have a spotting session to decide where to place music in the film, as well as, find out the emotional undercurrents of each scene and the overall tone. Elfman then spends a few weeks of free composition and experimentation to begin working out thematic material and to develop sounds and the harmonic palette. One element where Elfman's compositional process deviates from most film composers is that he will often compose 3 or more radically different versions of a single cue to give the director more options for musicalizing a scene. As you mentioned a few episodes ago, during The Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie's Revenge, Danny Elfman is the singing voice of Jack Skellington. And it would make sense then that he is also the composer of the music from The Nightmare Before Christmas. Tim Burton, there you go. He has been nominated for 4 Academy Awards for Best Original Score. That'd be for Good Will Hunting, Men in Black, Big Fish, and Milk, but no wins yet. He has 1 Grammy for his work on Batman the Animated Series out of 12 nominations. You can follow him on Twitter at Danny Elfman. As far as his discography goes, boy, oh boy. So for Oingo Boingo, there are 8 studio albums, 2 live albums, 5 compilation albums, and 2 EPs. Some of the notable films that Danny Elfman has composed for. Here we go. There's Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Back to School, Beetlejuice, Scrooged, Batman, Dick Tracy, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, The Nightmare Before Christmas, Black Beauty, Mission Impossible, Mars Attacks, Men in Black, Flubber, Good Will Hunting, Sleepy Hollow, 2001's Planet of the Apes, Spider-Man, Men in Black 2, Chicago, Hulk, Big Fish, Spider-Man 2, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Corpse Bride, Nacho Libre, Meet the Robinsons, Wanted, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, Milk, Notorious, Terminator Salvation, 9, 2010's Alice in Wonderland, Real Steel, Men in Black 3, Frankenweenie, Silver Linings Playbook, Oz the Great and Powerful, American Hustle, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, the 50 Shades of Grey movies, so 50 Shades of Grey, 50 Shades Darker, and 50 Shades Freed, Avengers Age of Ultron, Goosebumps, Alice Through the Looking Glass, Justice League, 2018's animated The Grinch with Benedict Cumberbatch, 2019's Tim Burton live-action Dumbo, Men in Black International, Dolittle, and most recently, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. For TV, he's done scores for some episodes of Pee-wee's Playhouse, but he's primarily known for doing the opening themes to The Simpsons, probably one of his most famous pieces of all time, if I had to say. Mm-hmm. Batman the Animated Series, Tales from the Crypt, Beetlejuice the Animated Series, Dilbert, and he won an Emmy for the opening theme to Desperate Housewives.
Of all the ones for him to actually win an award for.
Yeah, he was nominated for The Simpsons, but he won for Desperate Housewives. Go figure. As far as his contributions to video games, he contributed to the main themes for Fable and Fable II. The Fable 1 theme seems to be more like only he composed that, and we'll kind of get to how he worked into Fable 2 here. The Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 games use his Nightmare Before Christmas themes, and Lego Batman 1, 2, and 3 use some themes from the Tim Burton films that he composed. A couple miscellaneous things. He composed the music for Honda's Power of Dreams advertising campaign, and this was the first cinema commercial to be shot in the IMAX format. And he also scored the 10-minute video Joe Biden, which introduced Joe Biden's acceptance of the presidential candidacy nomination at the 2020 Democratic National Convention. So, who wrote most of the music on the Fable II soundtrack? Well, it was actually Russell Shaw, who's the music director at Lionhead Games. But since Danny Elfman composed the main Fable theme, he was actually brought in to kind of consult on the second game's Fable theme. From what it sounds like, there doesn't seem to be a concrete sort of version on this. Maybe like there are some cues from the original Fable theme that show up in the second one. But it really sounds like Danny Elfman could have composed the second Fable theme, as we'll get to. So yeah, it's just one of those things where I'm sure we can talk about Russell Shaw on another show. But it's Danny Elfman. Like, how many times will we get to talk about Danny Elfman on this show? So the music for Fable 2, a lot of orchestration, a lot of live orchestra performance, and that's done by the Slovak National Symphony Orchestra. That's where they recorded, at their orchestra hall there. Russell Shaw's sort of thought behind game music, it's all about, quote, just add color to the game. Music should be there as a backdrop to what you're looking at, so that it makes you feel like you're a part of that world. And I feel like that's fair, especially as games become more cinematic and all that. They don't need to be like Castlevania III, where it's driving the main auditory experience, but definitely have the music be a supplementary part of the background. interesting part about the sound design, though, there are 9,000 unique sound effects in Fable 2. So that they got to mix those all together in the limited amount of space that they do have on that disc. So let's get to the 5 critical tracks for Fable 2. And we'll start with the first one. You probably had a guess this is going to be here. It's the one that Danny Elfman had a hand in. This is Fable Theme. So yes, this theme seems to be composed by Russell Shaw and Danny Elfman, at least, borrowing possibly some elements from his original Fable theme. Where does this play? I had a tough time trying to figure out where some of these themes played, but this one, pretty obvious. It plays in the opening cutscene of a game. It's a pretty gorgeous, especially for the time, CGI sort of animation where it's a sparrow that's kind of flying about the world and showing you how the world of Albion and this Bowerstone sort of city town looks. It's gorgeous for the time. And then you get to the actual in-engine. It's like, oh yeah, it's not that good looking, but
the Kingdom Hearts effect.
Yeah, precisely. It's exactly it, right? So also this cutscene ends on a weird lingering of bird poop. Like it's this one like high-pitched voice from the child vocalist here as like it's kind of the camera's spinning around a 3D model of bird poop, because then it goes and transition the game like, oh, yuck, as it lands on one of the kids. And that's how Fable 2 starts. So the singers on the soundtrack are credited as the Pinewood Singers and the Tiffin Boys Choir. I'm going to guess that on this track in particular, it's the latter, because they weren't assigned to specific soundtracks. Because, yeah, wow. I mean, the orchestration here and the kind of gravitas that the Boys Choir gives this piece is fantastic. And it shows you, the world that you're about to explore. It kind of hits you right at the beginning. I feel like it does have a Danny Elfman sort of feel to it. If you have like those kind of kind of like, he has this sort of oompa style to some of his works. And so the kind of rhythm that it goes, it feels kind of Tim Burton like in a way. So I feel like this is a really neat piece to start off this Critical 5.
Yeah, I feel like you can feel the Danny Elfman like dripping off of this song, especially in the clip. This feels like what I think about when I think of Danny Elfman, even though obviously based on that 600-year-long discography, he's got a lot of variety to the work he's done. This is the kind of sound I think about when I think about Danny Elfman.
Yeah, 100%, especially if you think of like The Nightmare Before Christmas, kind of like a darker chords going on here. Maybe the kind of underbelly going on here in Albion. But things lighten up a little bit, despite tragedy, as we get to number 2 here on the Critical 5, and this is Bower Lake. Oddly enough, I think the location in the game is split up into 2 words with Bower Lake, but on the soundtrack, it's one word, Bower Lake. It's a place that in the world is kind of defined by this big Bower Lake, and it plays when you're in, essentially it's the starting area for young adulthood. You've grown these 10 years after the tragedy with Lucian and your sister and all that, and while the beginning of that game, I feel like, has a really good comparison to Kingdom Hearts 2 with the Roxas section, where you're learning about quests and how to do basic quest fulfillment. There, you don't really have too much. You're a little kid, right? Whether you're a boy or a girl. But it's here that you've grown up, you're in young adulthood, and you're going to start to learn how to use weapons, how to use magic, start to kind of really build that out. And so how do you begin your quest for revenge? Well, by starting in this starting area. And, strings are perfect here, kind of giving the lower strings for kind of the bass here. And then, simple string melodies here. Obviously, this is, going to be composed by Russell Shaw. The rest of this music composed by Russell Shaw. And it kind of gives that good essence of like the kind of undercurrent, the backbone, the backing, sort of the auditory experience to the start of a journey, the start of something greater.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good description of it. I like the violin. It feels very nice. Obviously, anybody that heard the clip knew I was going to mention the violin at any point. But, or maybe, is that a violin? It's not a cello. It's not deep enough to be a cello.
I don't think so, at least for the main melody, no.
Yeah, I think it's a violin. But, it kind of feels settled in, almost. And if you're a young adult in this place and have been here for a while and sort of grown up a bit, you would be settled in, so that does make sense. I don't know, it's a very nice piece.
We get a little darker here on number 3 on the Critical 5, and this one here is Wraithmarsh. Yes, those are some good creepy music vibes. So Wraithmarsh is an eerie and cursed swampland. It's an area that's hiding a secret about its past, and it's the part of the game where the hero must find Reaver. Apparently this is based on the Darkwood theme from the original Fable, and this one's just really cool. A lot of dissonant notes coming together. You get the children's choir coming back in and sounding really creepy. I think this does a really good job of like painting a dark picture of, maybe not the best place to be in if this area is cursed. I just feel like it's a nice contrast to the kind of happy, soothing sounds of Bower Lake, and now you have Wraithmarsh just really living up to that name.
Yeah, this feels quintessential like cartoon spooky. Like, it's not trying to be goofy, scary, or anything, but it is like, it feels very of its era and of its art style, if that makes sense.
Oh, 100%.
That's how I see it. I do like it. I think the child choir is a very, very good touch. Children singing are creepy. Look, I'm just gonna say it.
Yeah, if done in the right minor key, I could totally get that for sure.
Unless you're Yu Miyake, in which case you can make it sound great.
It's all about tone. And here's another tone change as we get to number 4 on the Critical 5 for Fable II. This is Bowerstone Market. Just like how I got Clockwork in Castlevania III on the cutting room floor, this is another track where it feels like time is of the essence. Like there's like a ticking going on in the background, especially again at the end of the clip there, where it's like, but this has like very quintessential, like things are moving. It's not as hustly and bustly as you might expect, because this is for Bowerstone Market, the big bustling commerce hub in the world, essentially, where you have all these different merchants. And apparently a lot of people in the YouTube comments were quoting a quote of, "The time is very late." That must be a quote from the game. I'll take their word for it. But again, yeah, it's just a totally different feel compared to these past couple tracks where very light, plucking strings, pizzicato here, and it works super well. But yes, time is of the essence. You have a dynamic world and the clock is moving, day and night cycles.
Yeah, the biggest surprise was for me, the sort of lack of the hustle and bustle feeling. This is not the tone I think of when I see somebody say this is the market song.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, this isn't Zelda or even like Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger and stuff.
Sure.
Like, you expect them to be really high key and just like loud and sort of super major key. And this one is literally none of those things. And I kind of dig that, but it just throws me off when I think of where it's supposed to play.
Wrapping up the Critical 5 here for Fable 2, it's a bit of a downer piece, actually, and this track is Marcus Memorial. So here's a story that I don't know if we've talked about anything quite like it on the show before. So Marcus Memorial is a track that starts playing after entering the Forest Sanctum. I'm not sure where that is necessarily in the game, but this track is near the end of the soundtrack. And this is where Marcus's poem can be found. And so this song is a tribute for Marcus Welfare, who is a developer at Lionhead Studios, who sadly died at the age of 19. They found that he wrote this poem, and they included it in the game, and this is a piece that is written, arranged in honor of Marcus. And apparently it's based on the Demon Door theme from the original Fable. At least that kind of makes sense. I guess there are demon doors in the Forest Sanctum, so that kind of ties there. But for a developer to pass so young and then have a track essentially be done and finished in his honor is nothing I don't think we've covered on the show before, and it is something that really took me by surprise in the research.
Yeah, it's not a story that I can think of that's repeated anywhere. That's a really, really neat story, actually. I really like it when specific tracks have specific stories behind them. It makes it all the more interesting to research these games.
As we talk about some tracks on the cutting room floor, though, I have two. And the first of these is a fun sort of whimsical one that really caught my ear. This is Old Town. This piece is pretty reminiscent of what I would imagine for a game like Fable, where you have this kind of older sort of, we're living in poverty in an English-inspired town thing, and we have this English humor going about. I feel like this really captures that well, for whatever reason. Like, when I imagined Fable music and not knowing much of what that was going into it, it was something like this. And so it really caught my ear. Doing the research, it didn't seem like that was, a fan favorite or tracks that stood out to people. So I didn't feel like putting it as a critical 5. But for me, on the cutting room floor, I'm like, yeah, this is what I imagined Fable music being, especially, early on. And shouts out to the bassoon. You can hear a bassoon in there, and that's pretty neat.
This song does sound a lot like it had some inspiration from the Danny Elfman stuff, though, because it feels very Elfman, even though it's not him.
Yeah.
It does remind me of, again, it feels very of its time and of its art style. And it just feels like the score to an animated film back then would sound.
Absolutely.
And I don't know, that's kind of neat. I like the style.
The second track that I have on the cutting room floor to wrap things up, this one is Westcliff. Again, not knowing much about the game, it sounds like Westcliff is a region that houses a bandit camp, and it's one of these opportunities where, if you so choose, you can revitalize this area as a small village, maybe to the benefit of your good morality there, I guess. I picked this one because it really stood out to me as big, like, Harry Potter film soundtrack vibes. And, we talked about actors that had played Harry Potter roles and done things with the Harry Potter franchise, but specifically the Half-Blood Prince soundtrack, big vibes on this one in particular. No real connection to Fable II as a game, just really stood out to my ear.
I don't know if I hear the Harry Potter comparison, but it reminds me of some movie score, and I could not for the life of me figure out what it is. But again, much like the other songs, it feels very of its time. And definitely you can feel where the inspirations for this score came from. And I think it's just kind of neat in general.
What will I never forget about Fable 2? I don't have much to forget or even remember about it, but it was interesting to look into Peter Molyneux's history. And for such a controversial, shall we say, figure in the game industry, it's like, well, all right, what has Peter Molyneux worked on since his time at Lionhead working on these Fable games? Well, he established a studio called 22 Cans, and they develop and self-publish games. And one of these games was a 2017 mobile game called The Trail Frontier Challenge. And this is a game that also made its way to PC and Switch. And my fiance made me aware of this game called The Trail. And it's a fun game where it's like this kind of relaxed game where you hike from campsite to campsite. You pick up items along the way. When you're at campsites, you do crafting and inventory management and things like that. It's a nice vibe to this game. And Peter Molyneux's the creative designer behind this game. So what I'll never forget is this mobile game, The Trail, coming up in research for Fable 2. Just kind of blew my mind there.
Maybe one day I'll see gameplay of a Fable game. Maybe. I don't know. It seemed interesting, but you're right. Of its time is definitely the way to put it. Open world games have come a long, long way since the Fable games. But we'll see if a new one, really updates everything, especially the Forza developers. That'll be something. Hey, a human hero is not a car. I don't know how they'll get about the world, but they're using that Forza engine. Who knows? Anyway, with Castlevania 3, 1, 2, 3 Roman numeral, then Fable 2, 1, 2 Roman numeral. That's about the tie between these two games. But really interesting soundtracks. Always need to talk about the NES, or not the Famicom, rather, the VRC6 chip, and Danny Elfman, despite the tie-in that was kind of loosely connected that he had with this soundtrack. I think it's a really good episode. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. That'll do it for us. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel.
The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. And that's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smasher Pieces and original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed with podcast episodes, but we also have a playlist where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to this monster playlist. Joe, anything being added this week?
Sadly, no. Neither of these games are on Spotify. Fable kind of surprises me, honestly, not being there, but Castlevania doesn't. We're still to the point where anything before Rondo of Blood is not on anything.
Especially when Fable II had a soundtrack release, and it sounds like it was on Spotify at one point. There was some fan outreach being like, come on, let's get it back on Spotify. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. When you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. You can leave some feedback for us. How are we doing with these episodes? Also give us suggestions for games to cover, as that's a push for us in 2022. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Ayako Yamaguchi.
I will be talking about Masaki Uno. Oh, that's a fun theme next week, tied in with a big game release coming out here in early June as we dig into the Summer Game Fest mess, all that fun stuff. Oh boy. All right, to play us out, I had a cover of Fable main theme, and it was a metal cover. Well, this is when I found out that the original theme that Danny Elfman primarily composed for the first Fable, totally different song. And so we go back to l'Orchestre de Jeux Video, and they're the French orchestra OJV who does live performances of medleys of game music. And so they did one for Fable 2. And in this clip here, they do the Fable 2 theme. So really enjoyed that. Always good to hear live orchestra performances. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Sound Chat. We'll see you next time. Take care.